Hugh Hewitt on this Friday and Saturday going into the weekend. I hope you are having a great start to your weekend. Ben Domenech is here, as he is when we are lucky on Fridays. He is the host of the Big Ben podcast, which I cannot recommend to you highly enough, and a Fox News contributor. Ben, I loved your conversation with Chef Andy Gruel this week. I've never heard the chef before. I followed him on X forever, and I quoted it. I can't believe he let a 2-year-old cut up mushrooms, though.
Wasn't that interesting? It totally makes sense, though. So for those who, and thank you for quoting it, I noticed, of course, for those who haven't heard the show yet, I asked the chef about, the challenges of sort of cooking when you have, particularly young children. We're not talking 4 or 5-year-olds where you can kind of reason with them, but, particularly like young children. And he said, well, if you involve them in the process, if you have them help, then they will be far more invested in the outcome and they will eat it. And he used the example of having his child cut mushrooms with a sort of a dull knife and said, if I made the mushrooms, the child would never eat them. But because he cuts the mushrooms.
I was fascinated by that and fascinated as well by the cost of running a restaurant in California. I mean, and I didn't know he was on the Huntington Beach City Council. I didn't even know that.
You remember that old line from Governor Reagan? I had a nightmare. I dreamed I owned a laundromat in Berkeley.
Yeah.
This is like a level beyond that. It's one of these things where you can't possibly imagine how difficult it is to function in Gavin Newsom's state. And frankly, the idea that the Democrats would embrace this guy as being their change agent, their rebranding, and plan to at this particular juncture, I don't think that you could argue that he isn't the guy who is the likeliest frontrunner for their next nominee, just given his behavior and given the reaction to him and given the money raised. And it's like you're going to nominate this guy who is so anti-business, who's so anti-development that even after these gigantic disasters and wildfires, nobody's building anything. It's absolutely heinous and just a sign of how much of a pit they have to climb out of.
I want to say a kind word for Governor Newsom. This is limited, all right? I want my audience to understand it's limited to his political skills, not his governing skills, because he failed terribly on the fires and the rebuilding is not progressing. He failed terribly on the train to nowhere, which is a giant money pit. He failed terribly on the homelessness problem in LA and elsewhere. And of course, his COVID record is checkered. But Ben, his political skills in the blue box, fighting from the blue ring, are pretty good. And I think he's raising a ton of money with this new social media. I think he's going to be their nominee.
I think you are correct on all those points. And I will also say Newsom is one of those Democrats who, and there are a handful of them, who I've actually known for quite a long time, only because in the before time, the long ago, I used to be on MSNBC pretty regularly in the mornings, and I would see him in green rooms back when he was lieutenant governor, and back when there was an attitude toward him of this guy's a rising star, and I think that he definitely has skills in a party that lacks a lot of people who have that type of skill. Politically, just naturally, and that's something that makes him a fighter. And I do believe that the strategy is going to, essentially put him in the catbird seat when it comes to money raising, which does have a huge role to play within the Democratic primaries, perhaps even more so than the Republicans. So.
He's just got to get to blue state primaries. That's what I don't think he's going to play very well, even in blue primaries in red states, but I think he's going to dominate in New York and in Massachusetts and in California. They don't want Kamala Harris back. They know that AOC is suicidal. So I think it comes down to him. Although John Ellis, for whom there's enormous respect in the world of news, says, look, you can't nominate someone from the coasts and expect to win. What do you think of that?
I think that is the real, sort of the rock and the hard place. The historical elements would tell you that is absolutely the truth. That you need to find the equivalent of Gavin Newsom, but from, I don't know, a state like Arkansas, but that doesn't actually exist for the government.
Well, it's Andy Bashir, although I think he's as dull as drying paint.
He's dull as dishwater, and I don't actually believe in his appeal. But look, it's a good chance to talk to you, Hugh, and catch up a bit because I know I've been on vacation the last couple of times, and so we haven't talked in a bit. But did you see this news today? I don't want to derail you, but did you see this news today about Pete Hegseth bringing back this the border medal, the
No.
1918 Mexico border medal, and they're branding it as being something that media is falsely reporting it as a new medal, but it was one that was actually created back in 1918 by the Congress to reward the National Guard and other veterans who served along the border during that moment, as you may remember, historically, when Germany was fomenting behind the scenes the potential of Mexico going to war with
That's
us.
what got us into World War I. The telegram.
Exactly.
Zimmerman telegram.
And they're tagging it as being a medal for people who are currently serving on the border and doing service in protection of American sovereignty there. I actually think it could be an indication of something more, Hugh. I think that medal could be an indication of the posture of Pete Hegseth and the Department of Defense generally as it relates to Mexico that could potentially foretell the possibility of additional activity, let's say, in terms of circling.
Well, Ben, we're off on a tangent, but let's follow up. I was on Special Report last night and was asked by Brett about the destroyers off the coast of Venezuela and the rhetoric of the administration. I pointed out 1991.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you about next, because I saw your clip. Yes, go ahead.
Noriega. I don't think we would do it to Venezuela. I wanted them to do it in the first Trump term because we had a legitimately elected opponent. We had people in the streets. That's not that way now, is it?
Yeah, it is not that way. But I do think that there is here's what I think is going on, Hugh, and I will say I'm not 100% on this, but this is what I do think is going on. I think that there is currently a somewhat of a conflict within the Trump administration between the defense side, which I actually think includes the vice president on this side, and the folks who are over at the State Department, not including Secretary Rubio, but others, who have differences of opinion about our relationship with the Mexican government as vis-a-vis these cartels. And the fact is that I think that more and more people are becoming aware that the alliance between these cartels and the Mexican government is so close and so impossible to break apart that there's going to have to be something that happens. Now, what happens, I think, depends entirely on what the president wants to do. But we could see a situation here, I think, where this administration makes the decision that the spigot has been turned off at the moment, but it's one that the Mexican government could turn back on at any moment, if they chose to. And
Ben,
circling
I got to tell you,
could be something that could really change their mindset about that.
The coincidence here that's just stunning me is that 3 nights ago I finally ordered the audio version of Grant's memoirs, and I am up to the invasion of Mexico when Grant is with Zachary Taylor on Monterey and Winfield Scott goes in for the kill in Mexico City, and how one does against Mexico decides who's going to be the next president, and that's why Zachary Taylor succeeds Polk. Do you think Hegseth might also be thinking 2028 along with Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance?
I 100% believe that is on the mind of people in his orbit. I could not say for certain that it is on his mind because I think, despite what some people may think of him, he's an ambitious guy, but I actually think that he's someone, who is a little more, humble in terms of his approach behind the scenes than some people might think. But I think that he has an enormous appeal among members of the American military, particularly members who served during the time that he did, and I think that should not be underestimated. I also think that, look, it's an interesting moment because we have all these different people, as we've talked about in the past, who are kind of all reaching that age of being able to compete and seeing the opportunity there. But at the same time, the president may just, throw out his imprimatur and it may be over before it begins. And that's something that I think we should, also keep in mind. That being said, I actually think the president likes to see competition, as we know.
Oh, he does. And I think the idea of The Apprentice with J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth, Tom Cotton is not, and Elise Stefanik is not really off the board, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right on that point. And look, the actual, I think, measure of this is going to be, can you seize on the same type of demographic appeal, the same type of broader appeal that the president himself was able to seize on. And that is a true test and could be, a hard test for each of these people for various reasons. That we have not yet had a situation where Donald Trump has not been on the ballot, and that's something that is going to be,
You're
I
right.
think, a real
You're right.
challenge for the
I'm going to talk with Ben during the break. You're going to have to listen to the Big Weekend Pod to hear what his take on Ambassador Bolton, the raid at his home and house and office is. Stay tuned, America. I'll be back. So, Ben Domenech, I've already spoken my piece about Ambassador Bolton on Fox News and on this program. What is your reaction?
I'm saddened by it, in part because I think that John Bolton's someone who, even if I disagreed with him quite often, is someone who I've respected. I do think that there were certainly issues related to his book that indicated that he had improperly potentially published classified information. And I think that this was a situation where, this administration was going to go after people who they believe had potentially violated the same rules that they went and, pounded their fists on the table about when it came to the president himself, and the records that were found in Mar-a-Lago. And certainly I think that they've gone after people from a perspective of finding hypocrisy and the like. I don't like targeting, but I also think that this is a situation where they don't want different, all the people who said no one's above the law, everyone has to play by the same rules. I think that this is that coming home to roost. And for John Bolton's sake, he had better hope that he didn't have a situation similar to, the former president, Joe Biden, where he had some things sitting around in boxes that shouldn't have been there.
Ben, he's such a good lawyer. I reminded me, he ran the civil division under Reagan, and he's been a colleague on the air for 20 plus years. I've spent days with him, and I just can't imagine he would make that mistake. I'm really more concerned about Foreign Agent Registration Act violations. That's the kind of murky stuff that I don't know how he makes a living anymore. Do you?
I do not, and I will also say, as someone who has a little bit of knowledge of FARA. FARA is one of these things that is so odd within the D.C. universe because it basically went unenforced for so long that a lot of people.
It's a trap door that everyone walks over.
Exactly. Everyone's kind of just started pretending it didn't exist, and then it was like, okay, we're going to start enforcing this again, and oops, there's a lot of folks who didn't actually plan ahead on that scope. And that's certainly a possibility when it comes to him.
I will look forward to talking with you once the warrant is published, because that will tell us whether it's documents or something else. Ben Domenech, thanks for your time today. Follow him on X at @BDomenech. Go get the Big Ben podcast. Listen to Chef Gruel and Ben talk about everything to do with California and why you do not want to open a restaurant there. Thank you, Ben.
Great to be with you.